So you have this general phenomenon that AI is going to supercharge the generally corporations that utilize it, and then every corporation looks around and says, "Okay, well, shit, I guess I got to do this now because like my competitors are going to do this," and then they all pile into it. A lot of money is going to get spent, and so for the average person, they're going to be more and more uh, on the outside looking in. Was the general thesis?
Yeah, I think there might be a part there that I disagree with, or don't really know, which is the analysis of like which jobs are going to disappear and so forth. But the overall thesis that you have, I think I very much agree with, which is the way at least things are structured right now, we're going to wind up with a few tech oligarchs and everybody else is going to get screwed. It's interesting because I know you and I both favor universal basic income. And a lot of the kind of tech lords like pretend like they do, but let's look at what's happening in the real world. To train their models, they're taking the intellectual property of every writer, every artist, that ever lived, and giving them nothing in return. It's like, how can you take that they're credibly going to give us universal basic income? We might get there, but it's not going to be out of the largesse of these tech lords. Instead, what they're trying to do is to take everybody's IP and also everybody's like personal information. Like one of the scariest things that happened since I finished the book is that OpenAI did two things. They bought a webcam company and they put Paul Nakasone on their board. Meanwhile, they've been saying, we want all your documents, we want all your email. And so OpenAI is poised to become, it's very Orwellian that they call themselves this, is poised to become the biggest surveillance company of all time, right? They're going to have much more data about you, personal data, than, say, Facebook. They're obviously not going to share the economic advantage of that if they're not even sharing anything on the artists. So they're starting to do a little bit of licensing deals under pressure. But you're going to have a few companies that have so much data. They're going to monetize all that data as much as they can. They are going to replace jobs. All the money and power is going to go to them unless we have some kind of restrictions on them. And they're fighting every restriction tooth and nail. Like, look what's happened with the California SB 1047. Basically, that is about having liability for doing really bad things. So if you don't cause $500 million in harm, that bill doesn't apply to you, essentially, or the most important section. I mean, the main section, I would say, or the central section, I should say this carefully, is really about liability for causing really serious harm. And they fought that as hard as they possibly could. I mean, you'd think, look, if you cause $1 billion of damage, maybe you ought to have some consequence. But like, take real world examples like the non-consensual deepfake porn. There are now these apps that will take a teenage girl and make a picture as if she were naked, and other kids will distribute and stuff like that. This is awful, and it's an outcome of this technology. None of the big companies that built the underlying technology are taking any responsibility for it. So there's a phrase I didn't invent, but I've come to really like, which is socialize the costs, privatize the benefits. That's what's going on. Is we as a society have to bear the cost of, say, the destruction of democracy through disinformation, or what happens to all teenage girls now that they have to deal with this as a constant thing as part of their lives. It's just been the same thing with social media, the polarization of
Yeah.
society. The platforms make all the money and the rest of us have to pick up the pieces. So even in this very narrow case, which is like you cause $500 million of damage because your AI runs amok, some horrible cybersecurity thing or whatever, they were trying to duck even that. They don't want any responsibility here.
So I had a call with another very concerned technologist, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, "You know what's a very, very powerful technology? Money. And because it's a powerful technology, we do things like keep track of it. It moves around. There are records." The argument he made was that AI is also a very powerful technology, maybe as or more powerful than money, and we have no idea who's doing what with it, where, when, like, why, how, etc. And I was like, that's a really interesting parallel.
Well, there's a lot of pressure to make it untracked. So, I mean, there's this whole debate about whether to open source AI. It's a little bit misleading because what people mean by open source AI is not the same as in other software, because really what they're talking about is giving you the weights of a neural network, but not all of the details to build it. So it's a technical side note. There's some fast and looseness in the arguments here. But companies like Meta have wanted to give away the software for free to anybody. And once you do that, once there's even one copy on the dark web, then there's no equivalent to know your customer. So the banks, you have to know something about your customer. Anybody can use the software, and anybody is. I mean, like, we know Russia is already using this kind of software to make misinformation, and probably much smaller actors are now. And basically Meta decided, without consulting anybody else, to just give away the technology for free. That means anybody can use it. I mean, it's not just like opening Pandora's box. It's like distributing the contents of Pandora's box using, Meta servers and everybody else as broadly as possible, making it as uncontrolled a technology as possible. Like, we've always had dual use technologies. They do some good, they do some harm. And in general, we have some kind of regulation around them, whether it's, laws about distributing guns or explosives or airplanes or food is a dual use technology. We have some regulation around that, whatever. It's just crazy to think that AI would be the only technology that isn't regulated. But that's what Silicon Valley wants you to believe. You might know the phrase, the Overton window, where you put out a ridiculous idea and try to fool people into accepting that. Well, what's happened here is the Overton window has been stretched, so people are contemplating, what if we had no regulation of AI? That's insane. Think of another industry that would work if it had zero regulation. Like
oil wells. Let's just not regulate them.
Let's just stop.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I mean, you look earlier points in history, many industries were not, and that's why we built the regulation, because they were all fucked up. So, you go back 150 years, there was hardly any regulation, and gradually people figured out one by one that each industry
they were just dumping chemicals in like the local waterway. It's like, whatever, man. The people figured out, it's like, wait a minute, that's actually
exactly
really
right. And I talk about that specific example in the book too. It's basically the equivalent right now of the AI companies are dumping their toxic chemicals in the waterways. This is what I meant about privatizing the gains, but socializing the costs. So that socializing costs, everybody deals with the bad water, with the toxic chemicals. We all deal with the lack of privacy, with the disinformation, with the deep fake porn, with the fact that identities can be faked. You can't do voice authentication with your bank, whatever. Like, slowly, but not that slowly, the fabric of society is getting torn apart by these tools, and the companies that make them and incur these, what we call negative externalities. I'm sure you know the term. The companies that are causing these negative externalities are not being held to account. Finally, we decided to do that, for example, with people pumping toxic chemicals, and we said, you can't do this anymore. There are fines or whatever. There's nothing for AI. That's why I wrote this book. It's like, we are just letting these people get away almost literally with murder in terms of what they're doing to the fabric of society. And the government's not taking care of it because of the kinds of inefficiencies and so forth that you and I have talked about before. And so the point of the book is, we, the public, have to say, that's not good enough.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Please do hit like and subscribe, and hit that bell if you want to be notified every time a new episode drops. Thank you.